quickly move on to the next speaker. Next speaker is Professor Christopher M. Candlin. He's a senior research professor in the Department of Linguistics at Macquarie. It's very difficult to introduce a person that you have known for more than about 35 years. You know, Chris has been a very, very close associate. I've been associated with him in several ways in the last so many years. He was my teacher. He was my PhD external examiner. Then he became a colleague. Then we became collaborators. We've done several projects together. So when I go back, I can keep on talking for hours without giving him an opportunity to say his paper. So I would probably restrict that to only a few things I would like to mention. He was in City University from 1996 to 2002. And he keeps coming back. He has been actually associated with a number of projects that we are engaged in even now. So he is very well known for people in Hong Kong, and not simply in Hong Kong, he's very well known everywhere else. You know, his career began in Lancaster, University of Lancaster, where he worked as head of the department for a number of years. Then he moved to Macquarie as head of the department. He retired, came here, and then he's gone back to Macquarie. And in addition to that, I think there's hardly a country where he hasn't been to or he hasn't been engaged in any kind of professional link or professional work. It's a very, very well-known person everywhere. Now, his research fields are broadly concerned with professional communication, particularly in the context of healthcare and law. These are the two areas where he has actually done a number of projects. Now, some of them include discourse-based appraisal of quality of life in the context of HIV/AIDS and of ideology, professional client interaction in psychotherapeutic discourse, issues of compliance and concordance in patient responses to healthcare delivery, discourses of risk and management in the context of healthcare and child abuse, arbitration and dispute resolutions in the context of family and of legal contracts, determination of communicative bases of professional expertise in healthcare, management, and legal context. Look at the breadth of experience. At the same time, there is actually a definite focus on professional communication. So he brings with him extensive experience and publication visibility in all these areas. And today, he'll be talking about strategic creativity as interdiscourse in professional communication.
Okay, thanks very much for that, VJ. It makes me feel extremely old. I am, of course, extremely old, but it's nonetheless always good to be reminded of one's youth. I want to talk today around the area of strategic creativity as interdiscourse. And the word strategic is going to be dotted about this talk, much like creativity is dotted around the policy documents of New Labour, as we've just heard. But it's quite an important part of this talk. I want to try and explore how different discourses are creatively and interconnected and intertwined in terms of a number of particular purposes and processes. Firstly, as a process of social and institutional change. Secondly, the idea of a creative exploitation of discursive resources in order to serve professional goals, which I'll capture under the Bakhtinian label for the moment of voicing, and personal creative strategies to enhance and change the relationships between professionals and clients, or professionals and patients, as they emphasize or alter their particular identities and roles. And finally, from an analytic point of view, as a discourse analyst, I'm interested in the ways of creatively interlinking key constructs of discourse analysis, namely constructs like activity type, discourse type, strategy, and semiotic realization. The background of this talk then is firmly, as Vijay said, in the area of professional communication. And it'll mostly focus, for the purposes of concentration, on health communication, but it has a background going beyond that. About a dozen or so years ago, I was working with my colleague Jon Maley in what was then a new and burgeoning profession of alternative dispute resolution in the context of the family court. And it was very interesting there to see how different disciplines and different discourses were melding and merging into a particular discourse which was accompanied by, or in fact stimulated, a new professional entity, namely that of ADR. And it was a very interesting moment because one could see how discourses, as I'll say in a minute, of therapy and discourses of adjudication came together into not only a kind of terminological struggle or a discourse analytical struggle, but also a professional struggle as lawyers sought, as it were, to aggregate to themselves some of the activities which had been previously undertaken by therapists and counsellors. And secondly, and more recently, work in healthcare and healthcare education, working with the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners on the one hand, looking at the relationship between excellence in terms of professional practice and delivery and communicative skills. So the connection between what you might call excellence on the one hand and communication and discourse on the other. And also working with a project with professional developers and trainers of general practitioners, trying to square the circle, if you like, between how discourse is manifested in practice, how discourse is manifested in the context of training, and how that discourse is evaluated and appraised by formal bodies that are designed to accredit, appraise, or qualify members of a particular profession. So I give you that as a kind of background to what I'm doing. Now, all here, I'm sure, will be familiar with my Lancashire colleague Norman Fairclough's classic statement: as producers and interpreters combine discursive conventions, codes and elements in new ways, in innovatory discursive events, they are cumulatively producing structural changes in the order of discourse. And this is quite classic in our work in the later in the 90s, in 95, 96, 97, looking, as I say, in the area of alternative dispute resolution as a new kind of professional practice. In fact, as Ron Carter points out in quoting some of our work in his book on creativity, he indicates how Jon and I illustrated how those involved professionally in alternative dispute resolution sought creatively to combine and fuse two different discourses, the therapeutic and the adjudicatory, into new, what he calls schema-refreshing discourse to meet the requirements of a new social and institutional practice. In the process also creatively evidencing the emergence of new orders of discourse. What I think one can take from that, of course, is that the creativity that's being referred to here is a creativity in this kind of blending and this kind of mixing from a performative point of view, but also such a quotation carries with it, of course, linkages to the notion of interpretive repertoires. That is to say that the creativity is not simply in terms of the performers, but the creativity is also in terms of those who are interpreting the data from those performers, which of course includes ourselves. And so it's important to see that as both interpretive and performative. After all, if one looks at an abstract painting, for example, Coburn or Rothko or whatnot, we contribute to that a considerable creative impetus. And that's long been understood, of course, in poetry and in art, but we can see it also in our own work in discourse.